There's a moment in life when reality stops obeying the rules you have learned since childhood. It doesn't happen with a bang. There's not a flash in the sky or a voice announcing a transformation. It happens in silence. A thought arises before the phone rings. A dream anticipates an impossible encounter. A book opens exactly on the page that answers the question you never had the courage to ask out loud. You try to ignore it. He tells himself that it is a coincidence, but deep down, he feels that something has begun to watch him back. And it is exactly at this point that Carl Jung asks you to stop running away. For Jung, spiritual awakening was not a fantasy created by impressionable minds, nor a refuge for those who wished to escape reality. It was the moment when consciousness began to break through the veil of ordinary perception and came into contact with dimensions of the psyche that had remained dormant for most of their lives. The true awakening of consciousness does not add anything new to the human being. It reveals that which has always been present, but has remained hidden under the noise of routine, inherited beliefs, and the masks we have learned to wear to be accepted. Maybe that's exactly what's happening to you right now. Maybe there's a reason I got to this video. Jung would never claim that the universe distributes answers at random. His investigation of synchronicity led him to a disturbing conclusion. When consciousness reaches a certain degree of maturity, events cease to appear isolated. They start to form a language, a silent conversation between the outer world and the inner world. This idea completely transformed the way Jung understood existence. For him, there is an invisible point where matter and spirit cease to be opposites. In this place, called by him unus mundus, all things remain connected by a profound order that escapes the ordinary senses. The awakened human being does not create this connection. He is just beginning to perceive it. This is precisely why so many people live experiences that they cannot explain. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and that person shows up a few hours later. An answer comes through a seemingly banal conversation. A symbol begins to appear repeatedly in different places. Certain numbers accompany your days as if they insist on getting your attention. An animal crosses your path just when you needed the courage to make a decision. To those who only observe the surface of life, all this seems like a coincidence. For Jung, however, these events may represent manifestations of synchronicity, one of the most profound signs that the psyche has begun to consciously dialogue with reality. But there is a detail that almost no one understands. Not every person notices these connections. The same event happens in front of dozens of individuals, but only one recognizes its significance. Why? Jung would answer that the difference is not in the event, but in the observer. Awakened consciousness develops a sensitivity that goes beyond conventional logic. It begins to capture invisible relations between apparently independent events. It is as if a new frequency is tuned within the mind itself. The world remains the same. What changes is the one who contemplates it. This process, however, has a silent price. The deeper your perception becomes, the more difficult it is to share what you live. How do you explain to someone that certain meetings seem planned by a higher intelligence? How to describe the feeling that certain events carry a meaning that is impossible to translate? Ordinary language does not reach these experiences, and often, those who have never started their spiritual journey interpret these reports as exaggeration, superstition, or imagination. It was precisely by observing this conflict that Carl Jung understood a painful truth. Every process of individuation brings the human being closer to his true self, but also distances him from collective illusions. The journey towards higher consciousness rarely begins accompanied. Most of the time, it begins in absolute silence. The empath knows this experience deeply. Your sensitivity is not born only from emotion. It is born from the ability to perceive invisible movements in the human psyche. While many see only behaviors, the empath perceives hidden intentions, unconscious conflicts, and even the presence of the shadow acting behind the words. This perception often bothers manipulators and even the narcissist, who relies on illusions to maintain their dominance. Not because the empath possesses supernatural powers, but because his conscience begins to recognize that which remains hidden to the majority. According to Jung, every expansion of consciousness illuminates forgotten parts of the psyche. Each perceived synchronicity is an invitation to look beyond appearance. Each significant coincidence represents a small opening, through which the collective unconscious sends signals to the individual prepared to receive them. The universe is not speaking louder. It is you who finally started to listen. Perhaps this is the reason why so many people feel that their old life has ceased to make sense. The same conversations seem empty. The same goals no longer arouse enthusiasm. Old certainties begin to crumble without new answers appearing immediately. This interval is frightening because the ego believes it is losing control. But Jung saw exactly the opposite. For him, this discomfort announces that something much deeper is awakening. When the old structures start to crumble, it doesn't mean you're getting lost. It means that the truth is looking for space to be born. But synchronicities are only the first whisper of this transformation. There is an even rarer capacity, a function of the psyche that completely changes the way you perceive reality, dissolves the old conflicts of the mind, and drives consciousness to a level that few can reach. It is precisely this portal that Carl Jung reveals below. It follows the sequel, maintaining the tone, structure, and progression of the script. Carl Jung believed that there is an instant when consciousness crosses an invisible boundary. Until then, the mind lives dividing everything into extremes. Right or wrong, light or darkness, victory or defeat, love or fear. The ego feels safe in these divisions because they simplify the world. However, spiritual awakening does not only amplify what you see, he transforms the way his own mind sustains reality. It is at this moment that what Jung called the transcendent function emerges, one of the rarest capacities of depth psychology, and one of the quietest signs that the process of individuation has really begun. Few people realize when this transformation happens. There is no such thing as a ritual, an advertisement, or a spectacular experience. It begins within extremely common situations. Imagine that someone disappoints you deeply. Before, you would react immediately. He would blame the other person or blame himself. But now, something different happens. While the pain remains, another perception is born at the same time. You see the suffering of that person. He notices his own shadow being provoked. He understands that both carry invisible wounds. Interestingly, neither of these perceptions cancels out the other. They coexist. This is the first sign that consciousness is changing. For Jung, truth rarely dwells at extremes. It arises when two seemingly incompatible forces cease to fight each other and begin to generate a third possibility. It is not about finding a comfortable middle ground. It is about allowing opposites to coexist until they produce a completely new understanding. This is why many people in awakening consciousness begin to feel that they can no longer participate in discussions in the same way. While everyone tries to prove who is right, something inside them seeks to understand why they both believe they are right. This does not mean weakness, nor does it mean indecision. It means that the psyche has begun to see beyond the surface of opinions. Maybe you've experienced something similar. You witness an argument between family members. For years, he automatically chose a side. Now, however, he can perceive the fear hidden behind the anger of one of them and the insecurity hidden behind the arrogance of the other. You keep seeing the conflict, but you can no longer reduce it to heroes and villains. The whole scenario changes before your eyes. This change usually causes strangeness. Some people say you've changed too much. Others claim that it has become distant, cold, or difficult to understand. There are those who say that you think too much before answering. What they don't know is that their mind has stopped working in straight lines. She began to see depth. Jung said that every true transformation requires that old psychological patterns die so that new ones can be born. This process is never comfortable. The ego wants quick answers because it believes that controlling means surviving. The self, on the other hand, understands that certain answers only appear when there is enough courage to remain within the doubt. It is precisely in this space of silence that something extraordinary happens. Problems that seemed impossible simply find a solution when you stop forcing them. Ideas come up during a walk while watching the rain fall through the window or while preparing a coffee. You don't feel like you're thinking. It seems that knowledge just arrives. Carl Jung observed this phenomenon numerous times during his studies. For him, when consciousness stops fighting against the unconscious, both begin to collaborate. It is not a battle between reason and intuition. It's a partnership. The conscious mind asks questions. The collective unconscious responds through unexpected images, sensations, and understandings. Perhaps this is why so many empaths describe a strange feeling of knowing something before they even find any logical explanation. They enter an environment and immediately perceive an invisible tension. They talk to someone for a few minutes and feel that there is a pain hidden behind that smile. Not because they are imagining things, but because they have learned, without even realizing it, to listen to signals that most people ignore. This sensitivity, however, also attracts challenges. Manipulators often feel uncomfortable in front of people whose conscience is awake. A narcissist, for example, relies on simple narratives to control those around them. It needs to divide the world into allies and enemies, victims and culprits, winners and failures. However, those who develop the transcendent function begin to see the hidden mechanisms behind these strategies. The manipulation loses strength when one can observe the shadow acting even before it fully manifests. This type of perception even changes the relationship with suffering. Before, you asked why certain experiences happen. Now he begins to ask what they are happening for. This small change completely alters the direction of the spiritual journey. Pain is no longer just an obstacle and begins to reveal forgotten parts of one's own soul. This is exactly what Jung experienced during his own inner journey. Instead of running away from the darkness, he decided to enter it consciously. He discovered that what scares the ego the most often holds the greatest treasures of inner transformation. The shadow is no longer an enemy. She becomes a stern but deeply honest teacher. Perhaps this is why so many awakened people feel a strange peace in the midst of chaos. Not because their lives are easier, but because they have learned that light and darkness go together. The fear continues to exist. So is courage. The sadness remains. Gratitude too. Neither eliminates the other. Both reveal different dimensions of the same consciousness. However, there is a territory where this expansion reaches an even deeper level. A place where logic completely loses its protagonism and the self itself begins to speak through symbols, images, and experiences impossible to produce consciously. Carl Jung discovered that it is precisely during this silent encounter that many receive the answers they would never find awake. And it is at this moment that dreams cease to be simple dreams to become one of the most mysterious languages of the soul. Carl Jung used to say that dreams do not hide the truth. They reveal it in a language that the ego has not yet learned to speak. While the awakened mind organizes, explains, and controls, the self communicates through symbols that span centuries, cultures, and civilizations. That is why, during spiritual awakening, the dream world ceases to be just a resting place. It becomes a silent temple where consciousness finds what reason could never achieve alone. What many call imagination, Jung recognized as one of the deepest doors to the collective unconscious. There's a moment when you wake up in the morning with the strange feeling of having experienced something more real than the day before. It wasn't just a dream. You crossed a place that seemed to exist before its time. He walked through landscapes he had never seen, but which aroused a familiarity that was impossible to explain. He met unknown people who spoke like old masters. When you open your eyes, the room remains the same, but something inside you has changed. No image disappears completely. They remain working in silence for days, weeks, or even years, like seeds waiting for the right moment to bloom. Jung noticed that these dreams often arose just as individuation was advancing to a new stage. The unconscious did not offer ready-made answers. He presented symbols capable of reorganizing the entire psychological structure of the individual. The transformation did not happen because someone correctly interpreted a dream. It happened because the symbol was still alive within the soul, slowly expanding consciousness until a new understanding naturally emerged. But why do some dreams remain engraved forever, while thousands disappear a few minutes later? And why do certain images return over and over again, as if insisting on being understood? According to Carl Jung, there are dreams that belong only to personal history and others that belong to the history of humanity itself. The latter carry universal images, the archetypes. It doesn't matter what country someone was born in or what language they speak. The wise old man, the great mother, the divine child, the hero, the mountain, the cave, the ocean, the serpent, or the light arise again and again because they do not belong to the individual. They belong to the collective unconscious, that deep dimension of the psyche where all human experience remains alive. This is precisely why so many people in awakening consciousness begin to dream of places that are impossible to locate on the map. Cities made of ancient stone, endless libraries, stairs that seem to lead to heaven, forests shrouded in a luminous mist. These scenarios don't have to physically exist to be true. Jung understood that they represent inner territories where the self leads the soul during its spiritual journey. Many empaths report a curious experience. After certain dreams, they meet someone unknown and feel that that person was already part of their life. Other times, they enter an environment for the first time and are absolutely sure that they have already been there. The common explanation calls this déjà vu. Jung preferred a much deeper hypothesis. Perhaps consciousness visited this place before the body reached it. Perhaps the unconscious walks far ahead of what the ego can perceive. What if time wasn't as linear as we believe? What if dreams were not remembering the past, but silently preparing the future? This possibility fascinated Jung. He observed numerous dream reports that anticipated important events, not as spectacular predictions, but as symbolic movements that psychologically prepared the person for what he was about to experience. A dream about crossing a bridge could precede a decisive change. A fire could herald the end of an old identity. The death of a well-known figure often symbolized the birth of a new stage of consciousness. The big mistake, according to Jung, was to interpret everything literally. The unconscious speaks through living images because they reach regions of the psyche where words cannot enter. This is exactly why many wake up emotional without knowing how to explain why. The symbol has already done its work before the mind even tries to comprehend it. Maybe you felt it. During the day, a simple tree arouses an unexpected emotion because it appeared in a dream days before. A song provokes tears for no apparent reason. An ancient smell opens an invisible door within memory. These small events show that communication between the conscious and the unconscious continues to happen long after you open your eyes. The deeper this communication becomes, the greater the feeling of isolation. How to explain that a dream completely changed your way of seeing life? How can we tell that a conversation with someone who never physically existed brought more wisdom than many years of study? Those who have never lived this experience tend to reduce it to imagination. However, those who have gone through this encounter know that there is a difference that is impossible to ignore. Some dreams do not seem invented. They seem to be memories of a reality older than existence itself. It was exactly this realization that led Jung to record his own experiences during the most intense period of his inner transformation. Instead of rejecting those images, he immersed himself in them with courage. He discovered that true depth psychology was not just about analyzing thoughts, but about establishing a conscious dialogue with the invisible forces of the psyche. It was in this dialogue that a good part of the ideas that would forever transform the modern understanding of consciousness, archetypes, and individuation were born. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of this journey is realizing that the self never screams. He always whispers. While the ego demands proofs, results, and certainties, the soul offers symbols, silence, and presence. Only those who learn to listen can realize that each important dream leaves an invisible mark on consciousness, slowly preparing for a transformation that has not yet happened in the outside world, but has already begun within oneself. And when this transformation reaches a certain point, something even more extraordinary happens. You stop believing that you have only one identity. The strange sensation of existing on different levels at the same time arises, as if one were observing one's own life from a place much wider than one's everyday personality. It was this discovery that Carl Jung considered one of the most profound experiences of all spiritual awakening, because it is in it that the ego finally understands that it has never been the true center of consciousness. Carl Jung stated that the greatest illusion of the human being is to believe that he knows himself only because he knows his own history. For him, there is a huge difference between remembering who you were and discovering who you really are. Spiritual awakening leads exactly into this unknown territory. At a certain point in the journey, something profoundly strange begins to happen. You continue to live your routine, talk to the same people, work, solve problems, and follow your commitments. But at the same time, you feel that there is another presence watching everything in absolute silence. It's not a voice, it's not a thought. It is a serene awareness that accompanies each emotion even before it turns into a reaction. Jung called this transformation the reorganization of the relationship between the ego and the self. The ego continues to exist, but it ceases to occupy the throne of consciousness. For years, we have believed that we are our fears, our opinions, our memories, and our desires. However, when the process of individuation matures, this certainty begins to disappear. The ego realizes, perhaps for the first time, that it has always been only a small part of something infinitely greater. This phenomenon has been described by several people who have gone through the process analyzed by Jung, and the reports bear a striking resemblance. One doctor reported that during an intense discussion with a colleague, he simultaneously noticed two completely different experiences. A part of him felt irritation and wanted to respond immediately. Another just watched the scene like someone watching an old movie. The most curious thing is that both coexisted without conflict. He had not lost his grip on reality. On the contrary, for the first time he experienced a consciousness greater than his own personality. Jung recorded numerous similar experiences during decades of clinical observation. He realized that when this new realization emerges, many people initially believe they are going crazy. After all, how do you explain that you can watch your own thoughts as they happen? How to understand that certain emotions are still present but no longer have the same power to command their choices? For Jung, this was not a symptom of psychological fragmentation. It was just the opposite. It was the birth of a broader consciousness, capable of including the ego without being dominated by it. There is a little-known account involving Jung himself that illustrates this transformation. During the most intense period of his inner investigation, later recorded in his personal writings, he described symbolic encounters so vivid that he had to temporarily abandon the ideas of controlling everything through reason. Instead of fighting those images, he decided to dialogue with them. This decision forever changed his understanding of the psyche. He concluded that what we call identity is much smaller than the true dimension of human consciousness. Perhaps you have already lived small versions of this experience without realizing it. Someone makes an unexpected criticism. Before, you would react immediately. Now there is a brief break. In this quiet space, you watch the impulse arise, notice the urge to respond, and, curiously, you can choose another path. It seems like an insignificant detail, but Jung believed that it is precisely in this small space between the stimulus and the response that true inner freedom is born. But this transformation also produces unexpected events that few people can understand. Many empaths report that they began to recognize their own patterns exactly the instant they appeared, not only after the mistake but during the behavior itself, as if an invisible part of consciousness silently said, "Look at what is happening now." This type of perception completely alters the way one faces one's shadow. She is no longer a hidden enemy and is recognized even before she takes control. It is precisely at this point that many manipulators cease to exert the same influence. A narcissist often acts by exploiting automatic reactions, insecurities, and unconscious emotional needs. However, when the awakened consciousness begins to observe these mechanisms in real time, the space for manipulation decreases dramatically. Not because the conflict disappears, but because the individual finally sees the cog before it completes its movement. Jung said that what remains unconscious directs our life as destiny. When it becomes conscious, it ceases to silently control our choices. There is a curious fact observed by several scholars of depth psychology. People who go through intense processes of transformation often describe a curious change in their perception of time. Ordinary days seem to pass quickly, while certain minutes acquire an intensity that is difficult to explain. A conversation of a few moments can remain alive for years. A glance can convey more than long speeches. It is as if consciousness ceased to measure life by the number of events and began to perceive it by the depth of each experience. Jung interpreted this as a natural consequence of the approximation between the ego and the self. When attention is no longer imprisoned only on the surface of reality, each moment begins to reveal invisible layers of meaning. The awakening of consciousness modifies the external world less than the way it is lived. But there is a challenge that accompanies this expansion. The ego hardly accepts losing its central position. He often tries to turn his own spiritual awakening into a reason for superiority. The person begins to believe that he has answers to everything, that he has reached a level above the others, or that he has finally understood all the mysteries of existence. Jung constantly warned of this risk. He called this phenomenon ego inflation, one of the most dangerous obstacles to the spiritual journey, and life usually responds quickly when this happens. Many report surprising situations right after moments of intense expansion of consciousness. After a deep inner experience, they make a simple mistake, forget an important commitment, face an unexpected failure, or are forced to acknowledge a limitation they thought they had overcome. At first glance, this seems contradictory. However, Jung saw in these events a natural balancing mechanism. The greater the experience of the self, the greater the need to remind the ego that it is still human. Perhaps this is exactly the most fascinating characteristic of true inner transformation. It does not eliminate imperfections. It completely changes the relationship you establish with them. Fear still appears. Doubt keeps visiting the mind. Sadness does not disappear forever. The difference is that none of these experiences define who you are anymore. There is something much deeper underpinning your consciousness. However, Carl Jung discovered that this reorganization between ego and self represents only the preparation for an even more extraordinary phenomenon. There comes a time when you stop seeing your own story as a random sequence of events and begin to realize that every challenge, every encounter, and every loss is part of an invisible architecture much older than your own existence. It is at this moment that archetypes cease to be just concepts of depth psychology and begin to reveal the living myth that has always silently led their journey. Here is the continuation of the script. Carl Jung understood something that few people can perceive in their entire lives. The greatest mystery of existence is not hidden in ancient temples, secret books, or distant mountains. It happens silently within one's own consciousness. When the spiritual awakening matures, you no longer believe that your story is composed only of isolated events. Every encounter, every loss, every challenge, and even every seeming failure begins to reveal an invisible structure that has always been present. It is no longer a matter of chance. It is as if a deep intelligence organized events to lead him to meet himself. That is why Jung devoted so many years to the study of archetypes. For him, these forces were not simple concepts of depth psychology. They were living patterns that have shaped the human experience since the dawn of civilization. The warrior, the sage, the great mother, the old master, the divine child, the shadow, the healer, and so many others do not belong only to ancient myths. They continue to live through people, influencing choices, relationships, and destinies without most even realizing it. Maybe you felt this at some point in your life. He met someone for the first time and had the impression that that person carried an energy that was impossible to explain. It wasn't just sympathy or dislike. It was as if something very old awakened within you. Jung believed that in these encounters, it is not just two personalities that meet. Often, they are entire archetypes, coming into relationship through two ordinary lives. But there is an even more disturbing discovery. What if what you call destiny is actually an invisible script that your soul has always been trying to reveal? What if every crisis has been a calling, not a punishment? When this realization awakens, seemingly ordinary events cease to have only a superficial meaning. A dismissal no longer represents only the loss of a job. It can symbolize the end of an identity that no longer corresponds to your true path. The end of a relationship is no longer just abandonment. It may represent the dissolution of an old version of the personality so that another can be born. Suffering continues to exist, but its interpretation changes completely. This is exactly what Jung observed in many processes of individuation. People who initially saw only tragedies began years later to recognize that those same events had opened the door to the greatest transformation of their lives. Not because pain was desirable, but because it forced consciousness to abandon structures that would never be questioned in times of comfort. Empaths usually go through this process in a particularly intense way. Your sensitivity allows you to perceive invisible movements in people's souls and also in your own spiritual journey. Often, even before an important change happens, a concern arises that is difficult to explain. The environment looks different. Old friendships cease to produce identification. Projects that were once important completely lose their meaning. Nothing has changed on the outside, But everything began to change inside. It is precisely during this period that many manipulators and even a narcissist intensify their attempts at control. Jung stated that every transformation arouses resistance, not only within one's own psyche, but also in relationships built on old unconscious patterns. Those who depended on their insecurity start to feel discomfort in the face of their new consciousness. Those who fed their guilt realize that they can no longer exert the same influence, not because you've learned new defense techniques, but because the shadow has begun to lose its silent dominance. There is a curious report, recorded by scholars of analytical psychology, about people who have undergone profound inner transformations. Many said they felt that certain important meetings were already prepared long before they took place. Some described the feeling of recognizing a master, a friend, or a companion on the journey without being able to rationally explain this certainty. Jung didn't see it as romantic fantasy. For him, when archetypes come into motion, they organize experiences that seem extraordinary to the eyes of the ego, but profoundly natural to the self. Perhaps this is why some people arrive at exactly the moment you need the most, while others disappear without any apparent explanation. The personality interprets these changes as losses or coincidences. The awakened consciousness begins to see them as movements of a much larger architecture, but there is an even more surprising aspect of this journey. There comes a time when you stop asking just who you are. The question silently changes. You begin to ask what story is being lived through you. This small change completely alters the meaning of existence. The focus is no longer on gaining recognition, accumulating experiences, or controlling the future. A much deeper need arises to live in a way that is consistent with what your soul has always known. Jung called this a personal myth. It was not a fantasy created by the imagination. It was the invisible design of individuation, the unique path by which each human being is led to his true self. When someone strays from this path, life begins to produce repetitive conflicts, exhausting relationships, and a constant feeling of emptiness. Not as a punishment, but as a call to return to the center. Perhaps you have noticed this by observing people who seem to repeat exactly the same problems for decades. They change cities, jobs, partners, religions, but they continue to experience practically identical conflicts. Jung believed that this happens because no one escapes their own archetypes while remaining unaware of them. That which is not integrated continually returns in new forms. The opposite also happens. When consciousness finally recognizes the hidden pattern, events that seemed impossible begin to reorganize themselves in surprising ways. Not because the universe has changed its rules, but because perception itself has begun to collaborate with the deep flow of existence. The individual stops fighting his spiritual journey and starts walking with it. However, this understanding brings an immense responsibility. After all, if your life is part of a much larger movement, each choice no longer affects only you. Carl Jung believed that all waking consciousness silently contributes to transforming the collective unconscious of humanity. This means that each empath who integrates his shadow, each person who overcomes the manipulation of a narcissist, each individual who chooses to live according to the self, modifies something far beyond his own history. And it was precisely this perception that led Jung to his boldest conclusion. These extraordinary experiences do not represent the end of the journey. They announce that a much greater transformation is taking place, not just within an individual, but within the human consciousness itself. And understanding this last step completely changes the meaning of everything you have experienced so far. It follows the conclusion of the script, maintaining the same philosophical, emotional, and deeply inspired tone in Carl Jung. Carl Jung spent his life trying to answer a question that continues to cross generations. What happens when a human being finally awakens to what he really is? After decades of studying dreams, archetypes, symbols, synchronicities, and the collective unconscious, his answer was never simple. Spiritual awakening does not transform someone into a perfect person, it turns someone into a whole person. This is perhaps the most important difference we can understand. We live in an age that teaches us to hide the shadow, to deny suffering, and to seek quick answers to deep questions. We are encouraged to build more and more efficient characters, but we are rarely invited to find out who is behind them. Jung observed that this distancing from the self produces exactly the emptiness that so many people feel today. It is not the lack of achievements that sickens the soul. It is the distance between what we show the world and what we really are. Perhaps now you understand why the 5 experiences we have gone through along this journey do not come about by chance. Synchronicities are not there to impress you. They draw your attention to a larger reality. The transcendent function does not appear to make you superior to others. It dissolves the prisons of the divided mind. Dreams cease to be simple, nocturnal images because the unconscious finally finds a way to dialogue with consciousness. The reorganization between ego and self shows that there is something much bigger driving your life. And the perception of archetypes reveals that your story never belonged to you alone. It has always been part of the great history of humanity. However, perhaps Jung's greatest discovery was another. He realized that none of these experiences has value if they remain only intellectual knowledge. True depth psychology doesn't end when you grasp a concept. It starts when you decide to live according to it. The awakening of consciousness does not happen while reading a book or watching a video. It happens when an everyday choice comes to reflect what your soul has already recognized as true. This is exactly where the journey ceases to be theory. Tomorrow, when someone provokes your anger, watch before you react. Silently ask which part of your shadow is trying to be seen. When a coincidence arises that is impossible to ignore, do not be in a hurry to dismiss it or turn it into a superstition. Just stay on your toes. When a dream touches your heart deeply, write it down before logic tries to erase it. When you feel like a cycle has come to an end, instead of desperately resisting, ask what old identity needs to be left behind. These small attitudes seem simple, but Jung believed that the transformation of consciousness happens exactly in these discrete moments. Not during major events, but in the silent decisions that no one sees. There's a very old image present in several spiritual traditions. That of a person walking at night with only a small flashlight in his hands. The light does not illuminate the entire road. It reveals only the next step. Still, each new step makes the next possible. Jung believed that the process of individuation happens exactly like this. You don't get the full map of your spiritual journey. It receives just enough light to continue walking. Perhaps this is the reason why so many people desire certainty while the soul offers only direction. The ego asks for reassurance before acting. The self asks for trust before it understands. It is in this space between fear and courage that true inner transformation takes place. If you're an empath, you may have spent a good part of your life believing that your sensitivity was a problem. Perhaps he felt the weight of other people's emotions, perceived hidden intentions before others, identified the presence of the shadow in environments where everyone seemed comfortable. Maybe you lived with manipulators, or even a narcissist who tried to convince you that your perception was wrong. Jung would say exactly the opposite. What you call oversensitivity can be a consciousness learning to perceive deeper levels of reality. The challenge was never to stop feeling. The real challenge has always been to learn how to turn that insight into wisdom. But never forget a warning that runs through Carl Jung's entire work. Spiritual awakening does not grant privileges. It expands responsibilities. The greater the consciousness, the greater the commitment to truth, humility, and the integration of one's own shadow. Those who believe they have reached the end of the journey have probably returned to serving the ego without realizing it. The true seeker remains an apprentice until the last moment of life. Perhaps this is why Jung wrote one of the most profound phrases in all of psychology. He who looks outside dreams. Whoever looks inside awakens. This phrase is not just a philosophical reflection, it is a permanent invitation. While we seek answers only in the outside world, we remain stuck in circumstances. When we begin to look within, we discover that consciousness has always held what we have spent years looking for on the outside. And perhaps there is one last synchronicity happening right now. Among millions of content available, you have come this far. Perhaps this did not happen by chance. Perhaps your spiritual journey has found exactly the message you needed at this point in your life. Only you can answer that question. If this video has awakened something true within you, don't allow that reflection to end when the screen goes off. Take a few minutes today to remain silent. Observe your thoughts without judging them. Write down your dreams. Reflect on the synchronicities that have been happening in your life. Ask your own self and what the next step of your individuation is. You may be surprised at the response that will come up when you stop trying to control it. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 experiences has marked your journey with more intensity? The synchronicities, the dreams, the presence of the self, the perception of archetypes, or the feeling that your consciousness has never been the same again? Share your experience in the comments. If you prefer to preserve your identity, write anonymously or just describe what you are experiencing. Your story may be just the signal that someone else needed to find in order to trust their own transformation. If this content made sense to you, leave your like so that more people can find this message. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue delving deeper into Carl Jung's teachings, depth psychology, and the journey of consciousness awakening. Always remember that the greatest adventure of existence is not to conquer the outside world. It is to become day after day what your soul has always known you were born to be.